She was 8 months pregnant when they dragged her across the polished floor, like she was nothing. Muthoni's hands trembled as she clutched her stomach, her breath breaking into silent cries while the office watched. No one moved, no one spoke. Her boss's voice cut through the air cold, final, telling her she was no longer needed. Outside, the rain swallowed her. Inside her job, her dignity, everything was gone. But less than 24 hours later, a black luxury convoy stopped in front of the same building, and a man stepped out who would change everything. Who was he? And why did he ask for Muthoni? If you're watching this, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories that remind us justice still exists. Morning in Nairobi never asked for permission. It arrived with noise, with movement, with the quiet struggle of people who had no choice but to keep going. In a narrow alley behind a row of aging apartment blocks in Umoja, Muthoni was already awake before the sun rose. The small room she rented barely held the life she carried inside it. A thin mattress on the floor, a wooden stool that doubled as a table, a single kettle sitting beside a small charcoal stove. And in the corner, covered with a worn kitenge cloth, was the only thing that mattered more to her than the child growing inside her. Her mother. Mama Etching lay curled beneath a faded blanket, her breathing shallow, uneven. Illness had taken more from her than strength. It had taken dignity, independence, the ability to even sit up without help. Some mornings she did not recognize where she was. But this morning her eyes opened slowly. "Muthoni," she whispered. Muthoni turned immediately, her face softening despite the exhaustion sitting deep beneath her eyes. She moved carefully, one hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. "I'm here, Mama." She knelt beside her, dipping a cloth into a small basin of warm water and gently wiping her mother's face. The tenderness in her movements was practiced habit born from months of quiet caregiving. "Did you sleep?" Muthoni asked, softly. Mama Achieng gave the faintest nod. Muthoni smiled, though her mind was already racing ahead to work, to time, to money. Always money. There was barely enough left. Her salary as a cleaner at Karibu Corporate Services had never been much. But after her pregnancy began to show, after the whispers started, after the small changes in how people spoke to her, it somehow felt like even less. Still, she worked, because she had no choice, because her mother needed medicine, because her child needed a future, and because quitting was a luxury she could not afford. She rose slowly, wincing just slightly as a dull ache tightened across her lower abdomen. It had been happening more often these days. The doctor had warned her to rest to avoid stress. Muthoni had nodded. Then she had gone back to work the next day. She moved toward the kettle, preparing thin porridge with the last handful of maize flour she had left. The smell was faint, almost empty, but it was something. As she poured a small portion into a cup for her mother, she whispered, "I'll bring medicine tonight. I promise." Mama Achieng looked at her, eyes filled with a mixture of love and quiet worry. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said weakly. Muthoni smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not alone," she replied gently, placing a hand over her belly. "I have someone helping me." Her mother followed the gesture, her gaze softening. There was silence for a moment. Then reality returned. Time. Muthoni quickly changed into her uniform, a faded orange and white set that had been washed so many times the fabric had thinned at the seams. She tied her hair back neatly, slipped her feet into worn sandals, and picked up her cleaning gloves. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. "I'll come back early today," she said. It wasn't true. But hope didn't always need honesty to exist. The city was already alive when she stepped onto the road. Matatus roared past, their music blaring. Street vendors shouted over one another. The air carried the scent of frying mandazi dust and petrol. Muthoni walked quickly, one hand supporting her lower back, as she made her way toward the bus stop. The journey to Westlands, where the company offices stood tall and polished, took nearly an hour. By the time she arrived, her feet already ached. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Inside Caribou Corporate Services, everything was different. The floors shined. The walls gleamed. The people walked fast, spoke in low, confident voices, carried themselves like the world belonged to them. Muthoni lowered her eyes slightly as she entered through the service door. She had learned early visibility was not always safety. "Muthoni." The sharp voice cut through the hallway before she even reached the supply room. She froze. Slowly she turned. Mr. Karanja stood at the end of the corridor, his tall frame stiff, his expression already hardened with irritation. His suit was perfectly pressed. His shoes gleamed like mirrors. Everything about him spoke of control, and everything about the way he looked at her made one thing clear. She was a problem. "You're late," he said flatly. Muthoni blinked, confused. I came early today, sir," she replied carefully. Karanja checked his watch dramatically. "Early?" He scoffed. "You cleaners think time bends for you." A few employees passing by slowed their steps, pretending not to listen. Muthoni swallowed. "I'm sorry, sir." Sorry. Doesn't clean floors," Karanja snapped. "Or maybe you've forgotten what you're paid for." Her hand tightened slightly around her cleaning bucket. "I haven't forgotten." His eyes flickered briefly to her stomach. There it was. That look. Not concern, not empathy, disapproval, annoyance. As if her pregnancy was an inconvenience he had been forced to tolerate. "You've been slower?" he continued coldly. "Sloppy, distracted." "I'm doing my best, sir." "Your best." He let out a dry laugh. "Your best is costing this company efficiency." The words hit harder than they should have, because they weren't just criticism. They were preparation. Muthoni felt it. Something was coming. "I'll work faster," she said quickly. "Please." I just what he cut in. "Need special treatment?" "No, sir. Because here we don't reward weakness." The hallway felt smaller, the air heavier. Muthoni's breathing tightened slightly, but she forced herself to stay steady. "I'm not weak," she said quietly. Karanja tilted his head, almost amused. "No," he said. "Then prove it." He gestured sharply down the corridor. "The entire third floor needs to be cleaned before noon." "Alone." Muthoni's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, that's usually 3 people. Are you refusing?" His voice dropped dangerous now. Silence. Everyone listening felt it. Muthoni shook her head slowly. "No," Good Karanja said, turning away. "Then stop talking and start working." He walked off without another glance. And just like that, the moment was over. But something had shifted. Muthoni stood there for a second longer, her heart pounding harder than it should, her body already tired, her back aching, her child pressing against her ribs. But she bent down anyway, picked up her tools, and walked toward the third floor. Because in her world, there was no room for breaking, only enduring. And somewhere, deep inside, beneath the pain, beneath the fear, a quiet question began to grow. How much more could she survive before something finally gave way? By mid-morning, the third floor of Caribou Corporate Services felt like a test designed to break someone quietly. The offices stretched endlessly, glass walls, polished desks, conference rooms that smelled faintly of expensive perfume and cold air conditioning. Every surface had to shine. Every fingerprint had to disappear. Every trash bin had to be emptied, as if it had never been used. And Muthoni was alone. Her movements had slowed, not because she wanted them to, but because her body was beginning to resist her. Each step pressed a dull weight into her lower back. Each bend sent a sharp pull through her abdomen. The child inside her shifted restlessly, as if reacting to the strain she refused to acknowledge. But she kept going, because stopping was not an option. She wiped another desk carefully, her hand steady, despite the trembling in her fingers. A group of employees passed behind her, their voices low, but not low enough. "She's still here," one of them whispered. "I heard she's pregnant," another replied. "Why doesn't she just stay home and do what starve?" a third voice added, followed by a soft laugh. Muthoni kept her eyes on the desk. Invisible. That was the safest way to survive. Around noon, the heat began to rise, not from the weather, but from exhaustion. Her uniform clung to her back, damp with sweat. Her breathing had grown heavier, uneven. She paused for just a moment. Just a moment. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered under her breath. "Just a little more." But before she could take another step, a sudden crash echoed from down the corridor. Muthoni looked up. Near the glass entrance of the executive wing, an old man had stumbled. He lay partially on his side, one hand gripping the edge of a potted plant. His walking stick rolled several feet away. His clothes were simple, worn, clean, but old. His hair was gray, his frame thin, fragile, and no one moved. Employees glanced, then looked away. A receptionist frowned, but stayed seated. Someone murmured, "Security will handle it." But security did not come. Muthoni's heart tightened. For a second, just 1 second, She hesitated. Her eyes flicked down the hallway. If Mr. Karanja saw her stop, if she didn't finish on time, if she was already being watched, her breath caught. Then she looked back at the old man. He tried to push himself up, failed. His hand trembled. That was enough. Muthoni dropped her cloth and walked toward him as quickly as her body allowed. "Baba Pole?" she said softly as she reached him. "Are you hurt?" The man looked up at her, surprised, not just by her presence, but by the concern in her voice. I lost my balance," he said, his voice thin but steady. "It's okay," Muthoni replied gently. She knelt beside him, ignoring the sharp protest in her knees and the pressure in her stomach. Carefully, she reached for his arm. "Let me help you sit up first." It wasn't easy. Her body was already tired, and the weight of supporting another person strained her further. But she adjusted her stance, braced herself, and slowly guided him upright. "There. Slowly." The old man winced slightly, but nodded. "Thank you," he whispered. Muthoni picked up his walking stick and placed it in his hand. "Can you stand?" she asked. "With help." She hesitated for just a second, then slipped her arm under his shoulder. "Lean on me." Step by step, they moved toward a nearby bench by the window. Each step cost her. Each breath felt heavier. But she did not let go. When they reached the bench, she helped him sit down carefully. There, she said, exhaling softly, "You're safe." The old man studied her, now really looked at her, at the worn uniform, at the tired eyes, at the hand that still rested protectively over her belly. "You shouldn't be lifting people in your condition," he said quietly. Muthoni gave a small smile. Maybe she replied, but no one else was coming. There was no bitterness in her voice, just truth. He looked around. She was right. No one had come. "I am Munzi Otieno," he said after a moment. "Muthoni," she replied. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, not of status or wealth, but of humanity. "Do you work here?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." He glanced down the hallway. "They let you work like this?" Muthoni followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "They let me work," she said simply. That was her answer. Not a complaint, not a cry for help, just a fact. Mzee Otieno leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. "You are strong," he said. Muthoni shook her head gently. "I don't think I have a choice." Before he could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Muthoni." The sound hit like a crack of thunder. Her body stiffened instantly. She turned slowly. Mr. Karanja stood at the end of the corridor again, watching. His eyes moved from her to the old man, back to her. And in that gaze, there was no confusion, no curiosity, only anger. "Get up," he said coldly. Muthoni stood carefully, her heart beginning to race. "Sir." He fell. "I was just helping. I didn't ask for an explanation." Karanja interrupted. His voice was louder now. Louder on purpose. People were watching again. I gave you a task, he continued. Or did you decide your job description has changed? Muthoni felt heat rise in her chest. I finished most of the floor, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I only stopped for a few minutes. A few minutes, he repeated, his tone sharp with disbelief. You think we pay you to play nurse silence? Heavy. Uncomfortable. Mazie Otieno looked between them, his brow tightening slightly. She was helping me, he said calmly. There is no need to. Karanja turned his gaze to him, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. But it vanished quickly. This is a private company, he said coolly. And we have standards. Muthoni stepped forward slightly. It's my responsibility, she said quickly. Please don't blame him. Karanja's eyes snapped back to her. Oh, I will blame you, he said. His voice dropped again, quieter, now, but more dangerous. Because you don't seem to understand something, Muthoni. He stepped closer, every word deliberate. Compassion does not appear on performance reports. The words landed like a weight. And right now, he continued, you are performing below expectation. Muthoni's throat tightened. I'll finish everything, she said quickly. I promise I didn't ask for promises. His gaze drifted once more to her stomach, then back to her eyes. I asked for results. There it was again. That unspoken accusation. That her existence, her pregnancy, was the problem. Now, he said sharply, get back to work. Muthoni nodded slowly. She turned to Mazie Otieno. I'm sorry, she whispered. He shook his head gently. You have nothing to apologize for. But she already knew. In this place, kindness always came with a cost. She picked up her cloth, walked back down the hallway, and resumed cleaning. Behind her, Mazie Otieno watched in silence, his expression unreadable. But something had changed. Something had been seen, and far beyond the walls of that office. A quiet chain of events had already begun to move, one that Mr. Karanja could not control, and one that would soon return not as kindness, but as reckoning. By the time the clock crawled past noon, the third floor no longer looked like a place where people worked. It looked like a place where someone had been pushed beyond what their body could carry. Muthoni's movements had changed. They were slower now, careful, measured not by time, but by survival. The shine of the glass panels reflected her faintly as she wiped them, her shoulders slightly, hunched her steps uneven, her breathing heavier than it should have been for a simple task. She pressed her palm against her lower back, pausing for just a second longer than she allowed herself. The baby shifted again, not violently, but insistently, as if reminding her, I'm here. I feel everything. Muthoni closed her eyes briefly. I know, she whispered. I know. Then she opened them again and kept working. Because stopping meant being seen. And being seen meant being judged. In the break room on the second floor, laughter echoed, not loud, but sharp enough. Wanjiku leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, while Kamau poured himself tea. "Did you see her?" Wanjiku said, smirking, still dragging herself around like she's competing in some suffering contest. Kamau chuckled. "I don't understand why she doesn't just leave," he said. "This job is not for someone in her condition." Wanjiku rolled her eyes. "Leave and go where?" "People like her don't have options," she replied. "They just keep showing up until something breaks." There was no cruelty in her tone, just indifference, which somehow felt worse. Kamau shrugged. "Still, she slows everyone down," exactly, Wanjiku said. "And you know Mr. Karanja hates inefficiency." They both fell silent for a moment. Then Wanjiku added quietly, "He's looking for a reason." Kamau glanced at her. To fire her, Wanjiku didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. Back upstairs, Muthoni had reached the final corridor. Her arms felt heavy, her legs unstable. Every muscle in her body seemed to pulse with a quiet warning she refused to listen to. She bent down to pick up a fallen stack of documents near one of the executive offices. As she reached for them, her vision blurred just for a second. A wave of dizziness hit her, sharp, unexpected. She grabbed the edge of a desk to steady herself. "Breathe, just breathe." The room tilted slightly, then settled. Muthoni swallowed hard. "I'm okay," she murmured, though no one had asked. But someone had seen. From the far end of the hallway, Ms. Njeri stood watching. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable. Unlike Karanja, she did not shout. She did not humiliate. She observed, calculated, and acted when it mattered most. She walked forward slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Muthoni," she said. Muthoni straightened immediately, ignoring the dizziness that still lingered. "Yes, dumb." Miss Njeri's eyes moved over her, taking in the sweat, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she subtly shifted her weight to ease the pressure on her back. "You don't look well," she said. Muthoni forced a small smile. "I'm fine." Njeri tilted her head slightly. "Fine is not what I see." Silence. Muthoni hesitated. For a moment, just a moment, something inside her considered telling the truth. That she was tired. That she was in pain. That she was afraid something might be wrong. But truth was dangerous. So she swallowed it. "I can finish the work," she said instead. Jerry watched her for a second longer. Then she nodded slowly. "I'm sure you can." There was something in her tone. Not concern, not kindness. Something colder, more distant. "Mr. Karanja is expecting a full report this afternoon," she continued. "He values discipline." Muthoni nodded again. "Yes, madam." Jerry turned to leave, then paused. "And Muthoni looked up. "Try not to make yourself noticeable." The words were soft, but they landed harder than any shout. Because they carried a message Muthoni understood too well. Exist quietly. Suffer silently. Disappear if necessary. Jerry walked away, and the hallway felt colder. Hours passed, or maybe they didn't. Time had begun to blur. Muthoni no longer tracked it by the clock. She tracked it by pain. Each task became heavier, each step slower, each breath more deliberate. But she finished. She finished the third floor, every desk wiped, every bin emptied, every surface polished. When she finally stood at the end of the corridor, looking back at the work she had completed alone, there was no pride, only exhaustion. She leaned against the wall just for a moment, just long enough to close her eyes, just long enough to feel the silence. But silence never lasted long in places like this. Footsteps approached, measured, familiar. Muthoni opened her eyes. Mr. Karanja stood in front of her again, as if he had been waiting. His gaze swept across the corridor, taking in the work, assessing, judging. "Well," he said slowly, "you managed." Muthoni straightened. "Yes, sir." There was no gratitude in his expression, no acknowledgement, only scrutiny. He stepped closer. "You look tired," he said. She didn't respond. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice. "Maybe this job is too much for you." The words were not a suggestion. They were bait. Muthoni felt it. She met his eyes carefully. "I can do my job," she said quietly. Karanja studied her, searching for weakness, for hesitation, for any sign that she might break on her own. But Muthoni held steady, even if everything inside her was shaking. He straightened again. "Good," he said, "because tomorrow we have auditors coming in." Her heart skipped. "And I don't want any complications." His eyes full to her stomach again, then back to her face. "Understand?" Muthoni nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Karanja gave a short nod, then turned to leave. But just before he walked away, he added, "Don't give me a reason, Muthoni." And then he was gone. The hallway fell quiet again, but the weight of his words remained. "Don't give me a reason." Muthoni stood there, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. A deep unease settled in her chest, because now she understood something clearly. He wasn't waiting for her to fail. He was preparing to make sure she did. And somewhere far from that building, in a quiet office overlooking the city, a phone call was being made. A report was being requested. A name Muthoni was being written down for the second time in one day. And the man holding that report was not someone who ignored what he saw. He was someone who acted quietly, decisively, and very soon, irreversibly. The afternoon dragged on like a quiet warning that refused to end. After finishing the third floor, Muthoni had been reassigned without rest. There was always more to clean, more to carry, more to prove. The building seemed endless when you were the one responsible for keeping it spotless. And today, everything felt heavier. Not just the work, but the air, the tension, the invisible pressure pressing against her from all directions. The mention of auditors had changed something. People were moving faster now. Conversations were shorter. Doors that were usually left slightly open were now firmly shut. Secrets Muthoni thought. This place was full of them. She didn't want to know any of them, but fate did not ask for permission. It happened just after 3 in the afternoon. Muthoni had been sent to clean one of the executive conference rooms, a space rarely used by people like her. The long, polished table reflected the ceiling lights like glass. Leather chairs stood neatly arranged, untouched by the chaos of ordinary workers. She moved quietly, carefully. Wipe, spray. Wipe again. Her mind drifted for a moment to her mother, to the medicine she still needed to buy, to the child that pressed against her ribs, like a reminder of everything she was fighting for. Then she heard it. Voices outside the room. Close. Too close. Muthoni froze. The conference room door was not fully closed. It never was. Just slightly ajar. And through that narrow gap, voices slipped in. "We can't afford mistakes tomorrow," one voice said. "Mr. Karanja." Muthoni's grip tightened around the cloth in her hand. Another voice responded, calm, controlled. "Ms. Njeri, the documents are already adjusted," she said. "The auditors will only see what we allow them to see." Muthoni's heart skipped. Adjusted Karanja exhaled sharply. "That cleaner." "Muthoni," he said. Her breath stopped. "She's been moving around too much today," he continued. "Asking questions without asking questions. I don't think she understands anything," Jerry replied. "Understanding is not the problem," Karanja said. "Presence is silence." "Heavy. Then we remove her," he added. The words landed like a quiet explosion. Muthoni felt the ground shift beneath her. Remove her. Not warn, not suspend. Remove. Jerry didn't respond immediately. Then calmly, "Tomorrow?" she asked. No, Karanja replied. "Today is better. Before she becomes visible." Visible? The word echoed in Muthoni's mind. Her chest tightened. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. She took a small step back, too fast. Her foot brushed against the leg of a chair. A soft scrape. But in the silence outside, it was loud. The voices stopped. Muthoni's heart slammed against her ribs. "Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't!" The door handle shifted. Her body reacted before her mind could. She grabbed the nearest cloth and forced herself into motion, wiping the table. Head lowered, movement steady. The door opened. Karanja stepped in first. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on her, still watching. For a moment, just a moment, time held its breath. "Muthoni," he said slowly. She looked a forcing calm into her expression. "Yes, sir." Karanja studied her face, searching for fear, for guilt, for anything. "Have you been here long?" he asked. Her pulse pounded. "Just cleaning, sir," she replied. "I was assigned this room," and Jerry stepped in behind him, her gaze equally sharp. "Did you hear anything?" she asked. The question was simple, but the weight behind it, heavy. Muthoni shook her head gently. "No, madam." Silence again. Karanja's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't believe easily, but he also didn't accuse without certainty. "Not yet. Finish quickly," he said at last. "This room is needed." Yes, sir. They didn't leave immediately. They stood there, watching her work, every movement, every breath, testing her. Muthoni kept her hands steady, her eyes focused, her mind racing. If they knew, if they suspected, if enough, Karanja said suddenly. She stopped. You're done here. But I said you're done. His tone allowed no argument. Muthoni nodded, slowly. She gathered her sounds, her movements controlled despite the storm building inside her chest. As she walked past them, she could feel their eyes on her back, burning, measuring, calculating. She stepped into the hallway, and only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands trembled as she reached the supply room. She placed the cleaning bucket down too hard, water sloshing over the edge. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. They're going to fire me, she whispered. Not a fear, a certainty. And not just because of her performance, but because she had been there. Because she had heard. Because she had become a risk. Her mind raced. Should she report it to who people like her didn't report people like them? That was not how the world worked. She leaned against the wall, her hand pressing against her stomach. The baby shifted again, stronger this time, almost like a response. I know, she whispered again. I know. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. But she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She had learned long ago crying did not solve anything. It only made pain visible. And visible pain attracted consequences. Elsewhere in the building, Mr. Karanja stood near his office window, his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, he said, quietly. It will be handled. A pause. No. There will be no complications. Another pause. I understand the importance of tomorrow. He ended the call slowly. Behind him, Ms. Njeri entered the room. She heard something Karanja said without turning. Njeri closed the door behind her. Are you sure? No, he replied. But I don't need to be sure. Njeri crossed her arms. So what's the plan? Karanja turned now. His expression was calm. Too calm. We create a reason, he said. Njeri's eyes flickered slightly. And if she resists, Karanja's lips curved faintly. She won't. Back in the supply room, Muthoni wiped her face with the back of her hand. Slowly she straightened. She picked up her tools again. Because what else could she do? Run, hide, hope? No. She would finish her shift. She would go home. She would take care of her mother. She would survive another day. That had always been the plan. But as she stepped back into the hallway, something deep inside her shifted. A quiet instinct, a warning that this day was not going to end the way she expected. And somewhere beyond the walls of Caribou Corporate Services, a man named Daniel Mwangi had just received a message, a name, a location, a brief explanation. He read it once, then again. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Prepare the car, he said calmly. His assistant hesitated. "Sir." Now Daniel looked up. "Yes," he replied. "Now." Because sometimes justice did not wait. It moved. And when it fed, it changed everything. Late afternoon settled over Caribou Corporate Services like a tightening grip. The light filtering through the tall glass windows softened, but inside the building nothing felt calm. If anything, the tension had sharpened, like a blade waiting to fall. Muthoni could feel it, not in something anyone said, but in what they didn't. The way conversations stopped when she walked past. The way Wanjiku avoided her eyes. The way Kamau suddenly became too busy to speak. Even the air around her felt different, colder, more deliberate, as if the building itself had already decided her fate. At exactly 4:30, the message came. Muthoni report to the records office. A junior supervisor said, not meeting her gaze. Her stomach tightened. This is it. She nodded quietly and set down her cleaning tools. Each step toward the records office felt heavier than the last. Not because she didn't know what was coming, but because she did. The records office was small. Too small for what was about to happen. Inside, Mr. Karanja stood behind a desk, his posture rigid, his expression already set. Miss Njeri stood beside him holding a file, and near the door, Omondi, the security guard. His presence alone said everything. Muthoni stepped in slowly. "Sir, you called me?" Karanja didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Control. That was his language. Finally, he spoke. "Yes." He gestured toward the desk. "Come closer." Muthoni obeyed. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure they could hear it. Jerry opened the file and placed a document on the table, neatly printed. Official. Cold. "This Karanja said tapping the paper is a report." Muthoni's eyes moved over it quickly. Her breath caught. Missing documents, negligence, disruption of operations. Her name? Everywhere. "This is not true," she said immediately, her voice trembling, but firm. Karanja raised an eyebrow. "Are you calling the report false?" "Yes," she said. "I didn't take anything. I didn't." "You were seen," Jerry interrupted calmly. "Seen?" Muthoni echoed her confusion, turning into fear. "Near restricted files," Jerry continued, acting suspiciously. "That's not—" I was cleaning, and yet Karanja cut in. Documents went missing shortly after. The room felt smaller. The walls closer. Muthoni shook her head quickly. "No? No, that's not true. Please check again. I didn't do anything wrong." Karanja leaned forward slightly. "Then explain why your name is attached to this report." "Because you put it there." The thought flashed through her mind. But she didn't say it. Couldn't say it. Instead, she said the only thing she had left. "Please, sir, I need this job." The words were soft, desperate, real. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Karanja's eyes. Not empathy. Recognition of power. "You should have thought of that," he said coldly, before becoming a liability. The word hit her harder than anything else. Liability. Not a person, not a worker, a problem. I'm not a liability, she whispered. You are, he replied without hesitation. He gestured to the paper. And this gives me the reason. Muthoni's chest tightened. Her hands trembled. No, she said, shaking her head again. You're doing this because you think I heard something. Silence. The wrong thing to say? Karanja's eyes sharpened instantly. What did you hear? He asked. Muthoni froze. She hadn't meant. Her breathing quickened. I didn't. What did you hear? He repeated, his voice lower now. More dangerous. Jerry watched carefully. Omondi shifted slightly near the door. Muthoni's mind raced. If she answered, if she denied, I didn't hear anything, she said. Finally, the truth wrapped in fear. Karanja stared at her. Long. Unmoving. Then he leaned back. Good, he said. Because it wouldn't matter. The words were final. He picked up the document and slid it toward her. Sign it. Muthoni looked down. Her vision blurred. Termination. Effective immediately. No benefits. No compensation. Her fingers curled slowly into fists. I can't sign this, she said. Karanja exhaled sharply. Of course you can. No, she repeated, stronger now. Because it's not true. Jerry stepped forward. If you don't sign, she said calmly, we proceed with formal charges. Muthoni's breath caught. Charges. Theft. And Jerry replied, negligence. Disruption. Each word heavier than the last. You could face legal consequences. The room tilted slightly. Muthoni grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her stomach tightened painfully. The baby shifted hard this time. Pain shot through her lower body. Sharp, sudden. But she stayed standing. Because falling would only make them stronger. I didn't do anything, she said again, her voice breaking now. Karanja's patience snapped. Enough! The word echoed in the small room. You think this is a negotiation? He continued. You think this company revolves around your problems? Muthoni flinched. I'm just asking for fairness. Fairness, he scoffed. You want fairness. He stepped closer. Too close. You're pregnant, slow, distracted, and now you want fairness. The words cut deep. Too deep. Muthoni's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. I'm still working, she whispered. I'm still trying. And you're still failing, he snapped. Silence. Heavy. Final. Karanja pointed at the paper again. Sign it, he said, or else. The words didn't need to be spoken. Muthoni looked at the document, then at her hands, then at her stomach, her child, her mother, her life. Everything balanced on this moment. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. Not because she agreed, but because she had no choice. Slowly, painfully she signed her name, Muthoni, and just like that, it was over. Karanja took the paper without another word, and Jerry closed the file. Efficient, clean, done. "You are dismissed," Karanja said. No emotion, no pause. Omondi stepped forward. "Please come with me," he said quietly. Muthoni didn't move at first. She couldn't. Her body felt heavy, her chest tight, her world shifting. Then slowly, she turned and walked. The hallway outside felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. People looked, some with curiosity, some with relief, some with nothing at all. Invisible again. But this time, for real. As Omondi led her toward the exit, she felt it. The weight, the loss, the fear. And beneath it all, something breaking. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, deep inside. But sometimes, the quietest breaks create the loudest consequences. And far across the city, a black convoy moved through traffic. Fast, purposeful, unstoppable, heading toward the very building that had just cast her out. The sky had turned a dull gray by the time Muthoni reached the front gate. Rain began as a whisper, soft, at first barely noticeable against the hum of Nairobi traffic. But within minutes, it thickened, falling harder, heavier, as if the city itself had decided to wash something away. Muthoni stood just outside the glass doors of Karibu Corporate Services, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. She was no longer an employee, no longer someone who belonged inside those polished walls. She was outside. Omondi stood behind her, awkward, uncertain. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Muthoni didn't turn. She didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. Apologies did not change reality, and reality had already been decided. "Take care of yourself," Omondi added after a moment. Then he stepped back. The door closed, and just like that, she was alone. The rain soaked through her uniform, quickly clinging to her skin, making the thin fabric heavy and cold. Her sandals slipped slightly against the wet pavement as she took her first step away from the building. Then another. Then another. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move, because standing still felt like surrender. Her chest tightened as she walked, her breath uneven. The events of the past hour replayed in her mind, in and again Karanja's voice, the document, the pen in her trembling hand. Liability. The word echoed. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm still here." But the reassurance felt thin, fragile, like everything else in her life. At the edge of the compound, she paused. The gate loomed in front of her. Beyond it, the city, unpredictable, unforgiving, real. She stepped through, and the world swallowed her whole. Cars splashed past, sending waves of muddy water across the roadside. People hurried under umbrellas, their faces turned away from the rain, from each other, from anything that didn't concern them. No one stopped. No one asked. No one saw. Muthoni kept walking. Her body felt heavier with each step, the ache in her lower abdomen returning stronger now. A dull pressure that came and went, tightening, releasing, tightening again. She slowed slightly. Her breathing changed. But she didn't stop. Because stopping meant acknowledging the pain. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Across the street, under the shelter of a small kiosk, Wanjiku watched. She had seen everything. The escort, the rain, the way Muthoni walked without looking back. Kamau stood beside her, arms folded. "She's gone," he said. Wanjiku nodded. But her expression wasn't the same as before. There was no smirk now. No casual indifference. Just something quieter. Something unsettled. "She didn't deserve that," she said softly. Kamau glanced at her surprised. "You said she was slowing everyone down?" "I said a lot of things," Wanjiku replied. The rain fell harder. "She helped that old man," she added after a moment. No one else did. Kamau didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. Truth had a way of arriving too late. Further down the road, Muthoni's steps faltered. The pain came again, stronger this time. She stopped. Her hand pressed firmly against her stomach. A sharp breath escaped her lips. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not now." But her body wasn't listening. The pressure built, then eased, then built again. Her vision blurred slightly. The rain mixed with something else on her cheeks, something warmer. Tears. She took a step forward, then another. Her legs felt weaker, unsteady. A small crowd passed her, brushing against her shoulder without noticing, or without caring. "Please," she whispered again, though she didn't know who she was speaking to. God, herself, the child, anyone. Another wave hit, sharper. Her knees buckled slightly. She reached for balance, but there was nothing to hold. And then she fell. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet collapse onto the wet pavement. Her body curled instinctively around her stomach, protecting, shielding, holding on to the one thing she could not lose. People slowed. Some glanced. One man shook his head and walked past. A woman muttered something under her breath and pulled her child closer. No one stopped. Because this was the city, and the city did not pause for pain. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time had no meaning now. Muthoni's breathing grew shallow. Her hands trembled. The rain soaked through everything, cold, relentless. And just as her strength began to fade, a car door opened. Not nearby, but close enough. Heavy, solid, deliberate. Footsteps followed. Not hurried, not uncertain, but purposeful. They stopped up beside her. A shadow fell over her, blocking the rain. For a moment, Muthoni didn't move. Couldn't. Then a voice spoke. Calm, steady, different. "Hey, can you hear me?" She blinked slowly. Her eyes struggled to focus. Through the blur, she saw him. A man. Tall, well-dressed, out of place in the chaos of the street. His expression wasn't cold, wasn't distant. It was concerned. Real. Her voice broke. I'm okay. It was a lie. They both knew it. The man crouched beside her, ignoring the rain soaking into his suit. No, you're not, he said gently. His eyes moved to her stomach, then back to her face. How far along are you? 8 months, she whispered. His jaw tightened slightly. Can you stand? She tried. Her body refused. Pain shot through her again, sharper than before. She gasped. And that was enough. Don't move, he said quickly. He stood and turned slightly. Get the car ready, he called out. Somewhere behind him, a driver responded immediately. Yes, sir, sir. The word hung in the air. Muthoni barely noticed. Because her world had narrowed to one thing: survival. The man turned back to her. I'm going to help you, okay? She nodded weakly. He slipped one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, too light for someone carrying so much. As he carried her toward the car, the rain continued to fall. But something had changed. Not the weather, not the city, but the moment. Because this time, someone had stopped. Someone had seen. And someone had chosen not to walk away. As the car door opened, and he gently placed her inside, Muthoni's eyes drifted closed. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. And just before she slipped into darkness, she heard it. His voice. Quiet. Determined. You're safe now. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time that day, she believed it. Behind them, across the street, Wanjiku watched the black car pull away. Her heart pounded softly. Who was that? Kamau asked. Wanjiku shook her head slowly. I don't know, she said, but her eyes remained fixed on the disappearing car. And I think everything is about to change. Because sometimes the moment the world turns its back on you is the moment something greater step. And back at Caribou Corporate Services, Mr. Karanja stood by his office window, watching the rain, unaware, completely unaware, that the consequences of his actions had already arrived. The rain chased the black car through the streets of Nairobi, blurring the city into streaks of gray and gold. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. Muthoni lay across the back seat, her breathing shallow but steady, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach. Her clothes were soaked, her hair clinging to her face, her body trembling with exhaustion. But she was no longer alone. Daniel Mwangi sat beside her. He had removed his jacket and draped it carefully over her, shielding her from the cold that still clung to her skin. His gaze remained fixed on her, not in curiosity, not in judgment, but in something deeper. Recognition, not of her face, but of something he had seen before, something that refused to leave his mind. Drive faster, he said quietly to the driver. We're almost there, sir, the driver replied. Daniel nodded once, then looked back at her. "You're going to be okay," he said, though she could barely hear him. He wasn't just saying it to reassure her. He was saying it like a promise. The hospital doors opened before the car had fully stopped. 2 nurses rushed forward with a stretcher, their movements swift and practiced. Daniel stepped out first, guiding them toward the back seat. "She's 8 months pregnant," he said quickly. "Severe exhaustion. Possible contractions." The nurses exchanged a glance. "Let's move," one of them said. They carefully lifted Muthoni onto the stretcher. She stirred slightly, her lips parting, as if trying to speak, but no words came. Daniel followed closely as they rushed her inside. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor replaced the gray shadows of the street. Bright, clinical, unforgiving, but safe. Moments later, she was wheeled into a private examination room. Doctors moved in quickly, checking her vitals, listening to the baby, asking questions she could barely answer. Daniel stood just outside the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Still, controlled. But inside, his thoughts were anything but. Because this wasn't the first time he had seen her. Not really. He closed his eyes briefly and remembered. That morning, before the rain, before the chaos, before everything changed, he had received a call, a simple message from his assistant. "Your father collapsed outside Kerbubu Corporate Services." Daniel had not hesitated. He had left immediately. But by the time he arrived, his father was already sitting, calm, collected. And beside him, a woman, a cleaner, helping him, supporting him, talking to him like he mattered. Daniel had watched from a distance, unseen, unannounced, because that was how he preferred to observe, without influence, without expectation. And what he had seen stayed with him. She had no reason to help, no obligation, no audience. And yet, she did, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was who she was. That woman was Muthoni. Daniel opened his eyes and looked through the glass window at her now, lying on a hospital bed, fighting to hold on. After being thrown away by the very place she had served, his jaw tightened, not in anger, but in decision, because he had learned something long ago. Kindness revealed truth, and truth demanded response. The doctor stepped out of the room. A woman in her 40s, composed but alert. "Are you with her?" she asked. Daniel hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yes." The doctor studied him briefly, as if assessing whether that answer was enough. "She's stable, for now," she said, "but she's severely exhausted, dehydrated, and under a lot of stress." Daniel's expression didn't change. "But the baby?" he asked. The doctor softened slightly. "The baby is still strong," she replied. "But if she had been left out there any longer?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel understood. "Will she need to stay?" he asked. "At least overnight," the doctor said. "Maybe longer, depending on how she responds." Daniel nodded. "Do whatever is necessary." The doctor paused. Her file says she has no insurance, she had added. Daniel didn't hesitate. That won't be a problem. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them. Then the doctor nodded and returned inside. Hours passed. The rain outside slowed, then stopped. But inside the hospital, time moved differently, measured in heartbeats, in breathing, in waiting. Daniel remained. He didn't leave, didn't make calls, didn't attend meetings. He simply sat, watching, thinking. At around 7 p.m., Muthoni stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. The room was unfamiliar. Bright, quiet, clean. For a moment, confusion filled her gaze. Then memory returned. The rain, the fall, the voice. She turned her head slightly and saw him. Daniel sat in the chair beside her bed, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if he had been there the entire time. Because he had. "You're awake," he said. His voice was calm, steady, grounding. Muthoni blinked. "Where?" she whispered. "You're in the hospital," he replied. "You collapsed." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "My baby," she said quickly, "is safe," Daniel said immediately. The doctors checked. Relief flooded her face. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." But she did, because she knew no one else had stopped. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then Muthoni spoke again. "You were there," she said slowly. Daniel didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes." "At the company?" she added. "With the old man?" Daniel nodded. "That's my father." Muthoni's eyes widened slightly. "He said someone helped him," Daniel continued. "I wanted to see who." Her gaze dropped. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly why it matters." She looked at him again, confused. He held her gaze. "You helped when no one else did," he said. Without being asked. Muthoni didn't respond, because she didn't know how. Because in her world, that wasn't something people noticed. Daniel sat back again. "And today," he added, "I saw how they treated you." Her expression changed. Pain flickered across her face. "I lost my job," she said quietly. "I know. They said I did something wrong." "I know," he repeated. Her hands tightened slightly over the blanket. "I didn't," she whispered. Daniel's voice was calm. "I know that too." Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, but full of something building, something shifting. Later that night, Daniel stepped out into the hallway. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number. It was answered immediately. "Yes, sir." "I want a full report on Caribou Corporate Services," Daniel said. A pause. "Everything, everything." Another pause. "And, sir, timeline?" Daniel looked back through the glass at Muthoni, then forward again. 24 hours. The assistant hesitated. "That's 24 hours," Daniel repeated. His tone didn't rise, didn't change, but it didn't need to, because it was final. "Yes, sir." The call ended. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Calm, controlled, decisive, because what had started as a moment of kindness was no longer just that. It had become something else, something bigger. And by this time, Tomorrow Caribou Corporate Services would no longer belong to the people who thought power meant cruelty. It would belong to someone who understood something far more dangerous. That true power was knowing exactly when to act. Morning arrived at the hospital with a softer kind of light. Not the harsh glare of corporate offices, not the restless chaos of the city, but something quieter, gentler, as if the world for once had chosen not to rush. Muthoni woke slowly. Her body still felt heavy, but the sharp edge of pain from the night before had dulled into a distant ache. The steady beeping of a monitor filled the room, soft, rhythmic, reassuring. For a moment she didn't move. She just listened. To the sound. To her own breathing. To the faint comforting awareness that she was still here, still holding on. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The baby shifted, strong, alive. Muthoni exhaled slowly, her eyes closing briefly, as relief spread through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. She didn't know who she was thanking, but the words came anyway. A knock sounded softly at the door. Before she could respond, it opened. A nurse stepped in, smiling gently. "Good morning," she said. "How are you feeling?" Muthoni hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Better?" The nurse checked her vitals with practiced ease, her movements efficient but kind. "You gave us a bit of a scare yesterday," she said lightly, "but you're stable now." And the baby, Muthoni asked again, unable to stop herself. The nurse smiled. Strong heartbeat. No immediate complications. Relief washed over her again. But beneath it, something else. Fear. Because safety, she knew, was temporary. The world outside this room still existed. And it hadn't been kind. "Do you have family?" "We should contact," the nurse asked gently. The question hung in the air. Muthoni's gaze dropped. "My mother," she said softly. "She's at home. Does she know you're here?" Muthoni shook her head. The nurse's expression softened further. "We can help you reach her," she offered. Muthoni nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "Because?" How do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? How do you tell someone you lost everything in a single afternoon? After the nurse left, the room fell quiet again. Muthoni stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts moved slowly now, like something fragile, trying to rebuild itself. Job. Gone. Money. Gone. Future. Unclear. Her chest tightened. What happens now? The question sat heavily in her mind. Because survival had always been about the next step, the next shift, the next payment, the next day. But now there was no next step, only uncertainty. Her hand tightened slightly over the blanket. "I'll figure it out," she whispered. Because that's what she had always done, even when there was nothing to figure. The door opened again. This time, she didn't need to look to know who it was. There was something about the way he entered. Quiet, controlled, present. Daniel Mwangi. He stepped inside, dressed simply now, not in the sharp suit from the day before, but in something softer, less formal, more human. "Good morning," he said. Muthoni turned her head slightly. "Good morning," she replied. There was a pause. Not awkward, just careful. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better?" she said. "Thank you. For yesterday." Daniel nodded once. "You don't have to thank me," he said again. But this time, his voice was softer. Muthoni studied him briefly. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel met her gaze. "Yes." Why, the words slipped out before she could stop it. Not rude, not suspicious, just honest. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not simple, because the reason wasn't just one thing. "I saw you," he said finally. Muthoni frowned slightly. "At the company," he continued, "helping my father." Her expression shifted. Understanding. That's why she asked. "It's part of it." She looked away briefly. "I would have helped anyone," she said. "I know. And that doesn't change anything," she added quietly. "I still lost my job." The words carried no accusation, only reality. Daniel didn't argue, because she was right. But he also knew reality was about to change. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said. Muthoni let out a small breath. "People like me, we're easy to remove," she replied. The statement was simple, but it held years of truth. Daniel leaned slightly forward. "What if I told you that's not entirely true?" he asked. Muthoni looked at him again. A flicker of skepticism crossed her face. "Then I would say, you don't understand how things work," she said. Daniel didn't smile, didn't correct her, because from where she stood, she was right. But perspective changes everything. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. Their eyes held for a moment. Then Muthoni looked away again, because believing something different felt dangerous. Later that morning, Daniel stepped out again. His assistant was already waiting in the hallway, tablet in hand. "We have the preliminary report," she said. Daniel took the tablet without a word. His eyes moved quickly across the screen. Financial discrepancies, unpaid wages, false reporting, employee exploitation. It was worse than he expected, much worse. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "At least 2 years," the assistant replied. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "And the leadership directly involved?" He nodded once. "Prepare the acquisition documents." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, this will move very fast." "Yes." "And the board will accept?" Daniel interrupted. His tone was calm, certain, because this wasn't negotiation. It was inevitability. "Timeline?" she asked. Daniel looked back toward Muthoni's room, then at the report again. "Today." The assistant blinked. Today, yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Because some decisions don't need time. They need action. Back inside the room, Muthoni had managed to sit up slightly. The nurse had helped her earlier, adjusting the pillows behind her back. It was a small change, but it made her feel less broken. She stared out the window now. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. And for a moment, it felt like something was beginning again. Not clearly, not fully, but quietly. The door opened once more. Daniel returned. He stood there for a second, watching her, then stepped inside. There's something I need to take care of, he said. Muthoni nodded. Okay. She didn't ask what, because it wasn't her place. But something in his tone made her wonder. When will you come back? She asked before she could stop herself. Daniel paused, then answered simply, Soon. Muthoni nodded again. She didn't know why the answer mattered, but it did. Daniel turned to leave, then stopped. And, Muthoni? She looked up. You're not as powerless as they made you feel, he said. The words lingered in the air. After he left, after the door closed, after the room fell quiet again. Muthoni sat there, still, thinking, because for the first time since yesterday someone had said something different. Not about her weakness, not about her limits, but about her strength. And even though she didn't fully believe it yet, a small part of her wanted to. Outside the hospital, the black car was already waiting. Daniel stepped inside. The door closed. Karibu. Corporate services, he said. The driver nodded. And the car moved. Not rushed, not reckless, but certain. Because in less than 24 hours, everything was about to change. And this time, not quietly. By late morning, Karibu Corporate Services looked exactly as it always did. Polished, controlled, efficient. But beneath the surface, something had begun to shift. People could feel it, even if they couldn't explain it. The cleaners worked faster than usual. The junior staff avoided unnecessary conversation. Managers walked with sharper purpose, their voices lower, their expressions tighter. Because today the auditors were coming. And in places built on appearances, audits were not just routine. They were threats. Inside his office, Mr. Karanja stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. His reflection looked exactly how he wanted it to confident. Composed, untouchable. But his eyes betrayed something else. A flicker of tension. He had covered everything. Every report adjusted, every number aligned, every weakness removed, including Muthoni. He exhaled slowly. Yes, everything was under control. A knock sounded at the door. Come in, he said. Ms. Njeri entered, tablet in hand. They've confirmed arrival, she said. Karanja nodded. Good. She hesitated. There's something else. He turned slightly. What? A new investor. she said. Unexpected. Karanja frowned. Who they didn't give details, just that he requested a meeting with the board. Karanja's expression tightened. Today? Yes. Silence. This was not part of the plan. Auditors were expected. Investors were variables, and variables were dangerous. Fine, he said after a moment. We'll handle it. Jerry studied him briefly. Do you want to delay? Karanja shook his head. No, we proceed as planned. Because control was not something he gave up easily. Downstairs, the main lobby gleamed under the morning light. The reception desk was spotless. The marble floor reflected every movement. Staff stood straighter, spoke softer, moved with rehearsed efficiency. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. At exactly 11:17 a.m., the first car arrived. Then another. Then another. Black, identical, precise. They pulled up in front of the building, in a slow, deliberate line, not rushed, not hesitant, but intentional. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Because this was not normal. The lead car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, composed, wearing a dark suit that fit like it had been designed for authority itself. Daniel Mwangi. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He simply walked forward, and the space around him adjusted, without being asked, without being told. Because presence like his did not need introduction. It demanded recognition. At the reception desk, the young attendant straightened immediately. Good morning, sir, she said. Do you have an appointment? Daniel stopped, looked at her. Calm, focused. Yes, he said. With the board? She blinked. May I have your name? Daniel held her gaze for a brief moment, then replied, Daniel Mwangi. The name landed, soft, but heavy. The attendant's expression shifted almost instantly. Recognition, surprise, uncertainty. Because names like his did not appear without consequence. Yes, of course, sir, she said quickly. Please, this way. She stepped out from behind the desk, guiding him toward the elevators. Behind him, his team followed. Silent, efficient, prepared. Upstairs, word traveled fast. Too fast. By the time Daniel reached the executive floor, Mr. Karanja was already waiting, standing at the end of the hallway, watching, assessing. Daniel stepped out of the elevator. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke, because both men understood something immediately. This was not a casual meeting. This was something else. Mr. Mwangi Karanja said finally, forcing a polite smile, Welcome to Karibu Corporate Services. Daniel nodded slightly. Mr. Karanja. No smile. No unnecessary warmth. Just acknowledgement. Please, Karanja gestured toward the conference room. We weren't expecting. I know, Daniel said, cutting him off gently. Not rude, but firm. And in that interruption, something subtle shifted. Control. Just slightly. Just enough. Inside the conference room, the board was already seated. Executives, managers, decision-makers. All present. All watching. Daniel entered without hesitation, took the seat at the head of the table, not because it was offered, but because it was his. The room fell silent. Karanja stood beside his chair, his posture still composed, but tighter now. Mr. Mwangi. One of the board members began to, "What do we owe?" "I'll be direct," Daniel said. His voice was calm, measured, but it carried weight. "I'm here to acquire Caribou Corporate Services." Silence. Complete. Absolute. The words settled slowly, like something too large to process all at once. Karanja's expression didn't change immediately, but his eyes, they shifted, just slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Acquire." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." "This is unexpected," another board member said. "I'm aware." "And the term someone else asked?" Daniel leaned back slightly, relaxed, but in control. "You'll find them favorable," he said. His assistant placed documents on the table. One by one. Precise. Prepared. Full buyout. Daniel continued. "Effective immediately upon agreement." Murmurs spread across the room. Because this wasn't negotiation. This was takeover. Karanja stepped forward. "This is highly irregular," he said. Daniel looked at him. "Is it?" The question was simple, but pointed. Karanja held his gaze. "You can't just walk in and I can," Daniel said calmly. And something in his tone made it clear. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Silence returned. Thicker now. Heavier. Why, Karanja asked. Finally. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folder in front of him, pulled out a second set of documents. Different. More detailed. More dangerous. He placed them on the table and slid them forward. "Because I've reviewed your operations," he said. The room stilled. "Financial discrepancies?" he continued. "Employee exploitation. Falsified reports." Each word landed harder than the last. Karanja's jaw tightened. "These are serious accusations," he said. "They're facts," Daniel replied. No hesitation. No doubt. The board members began flipping through the documents, faces changing, expressions shifting. Because truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how well it's hidden. And this, Daniel added, pulling out one final page, is a termination report. He placed it on the table, at the center, where everyone could see Muthoni's name, printed clearly. Karanja didn't move, didn't speak, because he knew. He knew exactly what that paper represented. And this, Daniel said quietly, is where you made your biggest mistake. The room held its breath. Because this was no longer business. It was personal. And the consequences of that had only just begun. Silence did not just fill the conference room. It settled into it like something alive, heavy, unavoidable. Every eye was now on the paper in the center of the table. Muthoni's termination report, a single document. But suddenly, it mattered more than all the others. Mr. Karanja didn't reach for it, didn't move, Because movement meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant weakness. Instead, he kept his posture straight, his expression controlled. "This is irrelevant," he said at last. His voice was steady, measured, but thinner than before. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply watched him, studied him. The way someone studies a problem they already know how to solve. "Is it?" Daniel asked quietly. The question wasn't loud, but it cut through the room sharper than any accusation. Karanja held his gaze. "We are discussing a corporate acquisition," he said, "not a personnel issue." Daniel leaned slightly forward. "This is a corporate issue," he replied. Karanja's jaw tightened. How Daniel tapped the paper once. "Because it reflects your leadership." The words landed, not just on Karanja, but on everyone in the room. Because leadership was no longer abstract. It was visible, documented, real. This employee, Daniel continued, was dismissed under false allegations. Karanja scoffed. "You're making assumptions." "I don't make assumptions," Daniel said calmly. "I verify." He turned slightly toward his assistant. She stepped forward, placing another file on the table, thicker, more detailed. "Security logs," Daniel said. "Camera footage. Internal timestamps." Karanja's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Because Daniel saw it. "You created a narrative," Daniel continued. "And then you enforced it." "That's not how this works," Karanja snapped. Daniel didn't raise his voice, didn't react. He simply held the moment. "That's exactly how this works," he said. And in that stillness, power shifted again, subtly, but undeniably. Around the table, the board members exchanged glances, uneasy, because this was no longer about numbers or projections or strategy. This was about something deeper, integrity. And integrity could not be adjusted in a report. One of the senior directors cleared his throat. "Mr. Mwangi," he said carefully, "are you suggesting that this entire acquisition is based on a single employee?" The question hung in the air. Because if the answer was yes, then everything they thought they understood about power was wrong. Daniel didn't hesitate. "No," he said. A pause. "Then I'm saying this employee revealed everything else." Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Because something had just been understood. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough. Karanja stepped forward. His composure was beginning to crack. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in small ways. Subtle, controlled, but real. "You're overreaching," he said. Daniel met his gaze. "Am I?" "This company has operated successfully for years," Karanja continued. "We have systems, structure, discipline." Daniel nodded once. "Yes," he said. "You do." Then he leaned back slightly. "And that's exactly why this is a problem." Karanja frowned. "Explain." Daniel gestured lightly to the documents spread across the table. "Because systems reflect values," he said. "And your system rewards silence, punishes vulnerability, and protects misconduct. Each phrase was deliberate, precise, unavoidable. That is not leadership, Daniel added. That is control. The distinction mattered, and everyone in the room felt it, because they had seen it, lived it, ignored it, until now. Ms. Njeri finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, strategic. "You're drawing conclusions from limited data," she said. "This situation is more complex than it appears." Daniel turned to her. "And yet," he said, "the outcome is simple." She held his gaze. "Which is a woman who did nothing wrong. Lost her job," Daniel replied, "while those responsible remained protected." The words landed clean. No exaggeration, no emotion, just truth. And truth was harder to argue with. The room shifted again. Not loudly, not suddenly, but unmistakably, because the balance had changed, and everyone could feel it. Karanja straightened. He wasn't done, he couldn't be, because losing control was not something he accepted. "This is still a business decision," he said, "and business decisions require logic, not emotion." Daniel nodded. "I agree." The agreement caught Karanja off guard, just slightly. "Good," he said. "Then let's focus on that." Daniel folded his hands on the table. "Let's." Silence. Then, "I'm offering full acquisition," Daniel continued. "Immediate restructuring, financial stabilization, legal compliance." The words were precise, clear, irrefutable. And in return he added, "You step down." The room froze completely, because this was the real moment. Not the documents, not the accusations, but this. The line that could not be crossed without consequence. Karanja's expression hardened. "That's not negotiable," he said. Daniel didn't react. "It is." "No," Karanja replied. "It's not." He stepped forward slightly. "You don't walk into a company and remove its leadership overnight." Daniel's voice remained calm. "You do," he said, "when that leadership has already failed." The words hit harder than anything before, because they weren't loud. They weren't aggressive. They were final. Around the table, the board members shifted again. Some looked down. Some looked at each other. Because now they had a choice. Not between options, but between truths. And truth is rarely comfortable. One of the directors spoke again. Quietly, carefully. "What happens if we refuse?" Daniel looked at him, then answered simply, "Then I proceed differently." No threat, no explanation. But the meaning was clear. Because power didn't need to explain itself. Karanja exhaled slowly. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked uncertain. Not defeated, not yet, but uncertain. And uncertainty was the beginning. Daniel reached for the final document, the acquisition agreement, and placed it at the center of the table. "Sign," he said. One word, simple, direct, irreversible. The room held its breath. Because this was the moment everything changed. Not gradually, not quietly, but completely. And somewhere in a hospital room across the city, Muthoni sat by the window, unaware that the system, which had broken her, was already beginning to collapse. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive slowly. It arrives all at once. And when it does, it leaves nothing untouched. The pen did not move immediately. For a long moment, it simply rested on the polished surface of the table. Small, ordinary, and yet suddenly the most powerful object in the room. Because whoever picked it up would decide everything. The board members sat in silence, their eyes shifting between the acquisition documents, the evidence laid out before them, and the two men standing on opposite sides of the table. Mr. Karanja and Daniel Mwangi, two different versions of power, one built on control, the other on consequence. "This is moving too fast," one of the directors said finally, his voice low but strained. "We need time to review." "You've had time," Daniel interrupted calmly. The director blinked. "We just received these documents." "You've had time to know what was happening inside your own company," Daniel corrected. "You just chose not to look." Silence followed, because the truth had been spoken out loud, and once spoken. It could not be taken back. Ms. Njeri leaned forward slightly, her voice still composed, still measured. "Even if we accept your findings," she said, "this is still an internal matter. It doesn't justify a full takeover." Daniel turned to her. "Internal matters," he said quietly, "don't stay internal when they affect people's lives." He gestured toward the termination report again. "This is not paperwork," he continued. "This is a decision that removed someone's ability to survive." The words landed differently this time, heavier, more personal, because now no one in the room could pretend this was abstract. Karanja stepped forward again. His control was slipping, but he was still holding on. "You're making this emotional," he said. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he replied, "I'm making it visible." That was the difference. Emotion could be dismissed. Visibility could not. The chairman of the board, an older man who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was slow, deliberate. "We need clarity," he said. "If we agree to this acquisition, what changes?" Daniel met his gaze. "Everything that should have been changed already," he said. The chairman nodded once. "Be specific." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Leadership restructuring," he said. "Immediate review of all employee terminations within the last 12 months. Compensation for unpaid wages. Full compliance audit. And..." He paused, just long enough for the room to lean in. "Accountability." The word settled into the room like something heavy and permanent. Accountability. Not adjustment, not correction, but consequence. Karanja let out a short, sharp breath. "And who decides what that looks like?" he asked. Daniel's answer came without delay. "I do." Silence again. Because there it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Power, clear, uncompromising. The chairman leaned back slightly, absorbing the weight of it all. "And if we reefin?" he asked again. Daniel's expression didn't change. "You already know the answer," he said. The chairman held his gaze, then nodded slowly, because he did know. They all did. Around the table, something began to shift, not dramatically. Not all at once, but gradually, like a structure adjusting under pressure. One of the directors reached for the pen, paused, looked at Karanja, then at the documents again. "This puts us at risk," he said quietly. Karanja seized the moment. "Yes," he said quickly. "Exactly. This is reckless. We don't even know. It also protects us." The director interrupted. Karanja stopped. The room stilled, because that was not what he expected. The director continued, "If these reports are accurate, and they become public," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Reputation, legal exposure, financial collapse. The implications were clear." Another board member nodded slowly. "He's right," she said. "Ignoring this doesn't make it disappear." Karanja looked around the table. For the first time, he wasn't being followed. He wasn't being supported. He was being questioned. And that was the real shift. Ms. Njeri spoke again, but her tone had changed. Slightly, carefully. "If we proceed," she said, "what happens to current management?" Daniel didn't look away. "They step down," he said. "No hesitation, no negotiation. And if they don't agree, they will." The certainty in his voice was absolute, because he wasn't asking. He was informing. Karanja's hands curled slightly at his sides. "You're dismantling everything we've built," he said. Daniel shook his head. "I'm removing what shouldn't have been built that way in the first place." The words cut deeper than any accusation, because they didn't just challenge his actions. They challenged his foundation, his belief, his control. The chairman looked down at the documents one more time, then at the pen, then at Daniel. "You're asking for immediate decision," he said. "Yes. No delay. No delay." The chairman exhaled slowly, because he understood something now. This was not a negotiation. It was a moment. And moments like this do not wait. He reached for the pen. The room held its breath. Karanja stepped forward. "Don't," he said. The word was sharp, urgent, but it came too late. The chairman looked at him, not with fear, not with obedience, but with something else, distance. Then he looked back at the document and signed. The sound of the pen against paper was quiet, but final, irreversible. One by one, the other board members followed, some quickly, some hesitantly, but all of them signed, because the decision had already been made. They were just catching up to it. Karanja didn't move, didn't speak. He stood there as the last signature was placed, as the documents were collected, as the room shifted around him. Because, for the first time, He was no longer in control. Daniel stood, calm, composed, but now in charge. "It's done," he said. "Simple, direct, final." He looked around the room. Effective immediately, Caribou Corporate Services is under new ownership. The words echoed, because they marked an ending and a beginning. Then Daniel turned, his gaze landing on Karanja, holding it, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. "You'll receive formal notice by the end of the day," he said. Karanja didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet hospital room, filled with soft light, Muthoni sat by the window, her hand resting gently over her stomach, still unsure, still uncertain, still rebuilding something fragile inside herself, unaware that the system that had erased her had just been erased in return. Because sometimes justice doesn't ask for permission. It arrives. And when it does, it changes everything. The news did not explode. It spread, quietly, like something too heavy to be ignored, but too dangerous to announce all at once. By early afternoon, whispers had already begun to move through the halls of Caribou Corporate Services. New ownership, immediate changes. Board signed everything. No one said it loudly. No one wanted to be the first to react. Because when power shifts, people wait. They watch. They calculate where to stand. On the executive floor, the atmosphere had changed completely. Not visibly, not in the polished surfaces or the structured routines, but in the way people held themselves. Less certain, less controlled. Because certainty had belonged to the old system, and the old system was gone. Mr. Karanja stood inside his office, alone. For the first time in years, the space felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had. His reflection stared back at him from the glass window. Still dressed the same, still standing the same. But something was missing. Authority, not removed yet, not officially, but already gone. His phone vibrated on the desk. He didn't look at it immediately, because he already knew what it was. Confirmation, notification, finalization, the things he used to control, now happening without him. After a moment, he picked it up. The message was short, formal, unemotional. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending internal review. Suspended. Not even given the dignity of explanation. Karanja's grip tightened slightly around the phone. For a second, just a second, something broke through. Not anger, not outrage, but something quieter. Recognition. Because for the first time, he understood what it felt like to be removed. A knock sounded at the door. He didn't respond. It opened anyway. Ms. Nairobi stepped inside. Her expression was the same as always. Composed, measured, controlled. But her eyes, they were different. I assume you've seen it, she said. Karanja didn't turn. Yes. Silence. Then they're asking for all department reports, she added, including termination records. Karanja let out a slow breath. Of course they were. Because this wasn't just a takeover. It was an exposure. They won't find anything, he said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Njeri studied him. They already have, she replied. The words landed. Not harsh, not accusatory, just real. Karanja turned then, finally. What are you saying? I'm saying, Njeri said calmly, that this is not something we can control anymore. The statement hung in the air, heavy, final, because control had been the foundation of everything they built. And now it was gone. Downstairs, the energy was shifting in a different way, among the workers, the cleaners, the people who had always moved quietly through the building, invisible. Now they were listening, carefully, hope, cautious, uncertain. But there, Wanji Ku stood near the supply room, her arms folded as she spoke quietly with Kamau. They're reviewing everything she did, Kamau frowned. What does that mean for us? Wanjiku hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. A pause. Then, maybe it means things will change. Kamau looked skeptical. Things don't change like that. Wanjiku didn't argue, because she had believed that too. For a long time. But something about today felt different. Not certain, but possible. And possibility was enough to make people look up. Upstairs, the conference room, doors opened again. This time, Daniel Mwangi stepped out. Alone. No entourage, no announcement. Just presence. The hallway quieted instantly. Not because he demanded it, but because it happened. Naturally. He walked forward, calm, focused. And as he moved through the space, people noticed. Not just who he was, but how he carried himself. There was no urgency, no need to prove anything, because everything that needed proving had already been done. He stopped near the central office area, looked around, took in the environment, the people, the structure. Then he turned to his assistant, who had followed at a distance. Start the review process, he said. She nodded. Where do we begin? Daniel's gaze moved slowly across the floor, then settled. Terminations, he said. Simple, direct, but intentional. Because that was where the truth often hid, and the decisions no one questioned. Minutes later, a message was sent across internal systems. Formal, clear, unavoidable. All employee terminations within the last 12 months are under review. Affected individuals will be contacted. The message reached every department, every level, every person, and with it, something shifted again. Because for the first time, the system was not protecting itself. It was examining itself. Back in the hospital, Muthoni sat quietly by the window. The Yi had cleared completely now. Soft blue stretching above the city. She had been discharged from bed rest, but advised to remain under observation for another day. Her body felt stronger, not fully, but enough. She held a small phone in her hands, the one Daniel had arranged for her that morning. A simple device. But to her, it felt like connection, possibility, responsibility. She had already called her mother, explained what she could, left out what she couldn't, because some things were too heavy to put into words. Now she sat in silence, thinking about what came next, because survival always required a next step, even when you couldn't see it clearly. A knock sounded at the door. She looked up. Daniel stepped inside. There was something different about him, not in his appearance, but in the energy he carried. Something resolved. "You're feeling better," he said. She nodded. "Yes." A pause. "Then thank you for everything," she added. Daniel shook his head slightly. "It's not finished," he said. Muthoni frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel stepped closer. "Not too close. Just enough." "I went to your company," he said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because what happened to you shouldn't have happened." Her breath caught. "That doesn't change anything," she said quickly. "I still lost." "It does." Daniel interrupted gently. She stared at him, uncertain, afraid to believe. "What did you do?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the answer was bigger than a single sentence. "I made sure they can't do it again," he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, something final. Muthoni's hands tightened slightly around the phone. "You reported them?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "No." A pause. Then I took over. Silence. Complete. Because the meaning took time to land, to settle, to be understood. "You..." What she whispered. Daniel held her gaze. "I now own Caribou Corporate Services." The room felt smaller. Muthoni's heart began to race. Not from fear, but from something else, something unfamiliar. Hope. But hope was dangerous. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. Daniel's voice softened. "It means," he said, "what happened to you is being reviewed." Her eyes filled slightly. "And if they find out I didn't do anything wrong..." Daniel didn't hesitate. "They will." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away, because this time it wasn't pain. It was something else, something fragile, something new. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, and this time his answer was clear. "Because you didn't walk away when you could have," he said. Silence settled again. But now it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, but open. Because something had changed. Not just in the company, but in her world. And for the first time, Muthoni allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were about to be different. The city did not know what had changed. Traffic still roared through the streets of Nairobi. Vendors still called out prices. Life continued in its usual rhythm, indifferent to the quiet transformation, unfolding behind glass walls and closed doors. But inside Karibu Corporate Services, everything was different. Not because of announcements, not because of celebration, but because truth had entered the building. And truth does not move quietly. By mid-morning, the review process had begun in full. Files were opened, records examined, names revisited, not as numbers, not as entries, but as people, stories, decisions, and consequences. Daniel Mwangi stood in the main operations office reviewing a series of reports with his legal team. His expression remained composed, but his focus was absolute. Pull all internal complaints from the last year, he said. They've already started compiling them, sir, his assistant replied. Cross-reference them with termination records. Yes, sir. And I want direct statements from staff, Daniel added. Not summaries, not filtered reports. Direct. The assistant nodded. Because this wasn't just an audit. It was an excavation. And Daniel intended to uncover everything. Elsewhere in the building, the atmosphere had shifted again. This time, it wasn't tension. It was anticipation. Staff moved differently now. More aware. More cautious. But also more alert, because something unexpected had happened. Someone had challenged the system, and the system had responded. In a small meeting room on the second floor, Wanjiku sat across from a young HR officer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. So, you're reviewing past terminations? She asked carefully. The officer nodded. Yes. Wanjiku hesitated. Then there was someone, she said. Yesterday. The officer looked up. Muthoni Wanjiku continued. She was dismissed. The officer typed something into her system. We have that file, she said. Wanjiku swallowed. It wasn't right. The officer paused, then looked at her. Can you explain? Wanjiku took a breath, because speaking was not something she was used to. But silence had done enough. She didn't steal anything, Wanjiku said. She was just there. Where near the executive offices, Wanjiku replied. After she helped an old man who fell. The officer's fingers paused over the keyboard. An old man, Wanjiku nodded. No one else helped him, she added quietly. The room fell silent. Because now the story was changing. Not from above, but from within. Upstairs, Mr. Karanja sat alone in a temporary office. Not his office, just a space, a place to wait. His belongings had been removed, his access restricted, his authority gone. He stared at the blank wall in front of him, not thinking, not planning, just sitting, because for the first time in years there was nothing to control. The door opened. A legal representative stepped in. Mr. Karanja, she said. He didn't respond immediately. Then slowly, yes, we need to ask you a few questions. Of course they did, because now he was the subject, not the authority. He leaned back slightly. Go ahead. The questions came, one by one. Precise, direct, unavoidable. Did you authorize the termination of Muthoni on false grounds number? Were you aware of discrepancies in financial reporting? Did you instruct staff to alter documents ahead of the audit? Number, each answer the same. Each denial, predictable. But outside that room, evidence was being compiled. Statements collected, patterns revealed, and truth does not rely on denial. Back at the hospital, Muthoni sat on the edge of her bed. She had been cleared to walk short distances now, though the nurse had insisted she move carefully. Her body still felt fragile, but her mind was shifting. Because something had changed. Not in her situation, not yet, but in her understanding of it. Daniel stood near the window, speaking quietly on the phone. "Yes," he said. "Proceed with compensation reviews." A pause. "And ensure all affected staff are contacted directly." Another pause. No delays. He ended the call and turned back to her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Muthoni nodded slowly, stronger. There was a moment of silence. Then she spoke. "They're really doing it, aren't they?" Daniel didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes, all of it. Yes." Her hands rested gently over her stomach. "And my case?" Daniel stepped closer. "Already under review." Muthoni looked down, processing, absorbing, trying to understand how something so final could suddenly become uncertain again. "What if they still say I did something wrong?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't hesitate. "They won't." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen everything. Because I've verified it. Because I've already decided." But he didn't say those things. Instead, he said, "Because the truth is clear." Muthoni looked up at him, and for the first time, she believed it. Not fully, not completely, but enough. That afternoon, a formal notice was sent. To Muthoni. Direct. Clear. Official. She read it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Termination under review. Pending reinstatement decision. Pending, the word felt unfamiliar. Because it meant not over, not final, not decided. Her chest tightened. Not with fear, but with something else. Possibility. Back at Caribou Corporate Services, the final phase of the review began. The evidence had been compiled. The statements recorded. The patterns confirmed. Daniel stood in the conference room once more. But this time, it was different. No negotiation, no debate, just conclusion. "Proceed," he said. The legal team nodded. Because everything that needed to be proven had been. And somewhere between those two spaces, the hospital and the Company A line was being drawn. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently, because justice was no longer a possibility. It was becoming reality, and reality does not wait. That evening, Muthoni stood by the hospital window again. The sky had turned gold. Soft, warm, different from the storm that had brought her there. She placed one hand on the glass, the other on her stomach. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was holding everything together alone, because somewhere beyond that window, something had shifted. Something had responded. Something had chosen not to look away. And tomorrow, everything would be decided. Not by fear, not by power, but by truth. And truth was finally on her side. Morning did not arrive with Noya. It arrived with certainty. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't announce itself, but settles into everything quietly, like something that has already decided what comes next. At Karibu Corporate Services, the final meeting had already begun. Not to argue, not to negotiate, but to conclude. Daniel Mwangi stood at the head of the conference table, reviewing the final report laid out before him. Around him, the legal team and compliance officers sat in silence. Their work completed, their findings aligned. Everything had been verified. Every document, every statement, every detail. There were no gaps left, only outcomes. Proceed with the official decision, Daniel said. The lead legal officer nodded and opened the final file. Termination of Muthoni declared unlawful. She read, all allegations against her unsubstantiated and fabricated. The words landed with quiet finality. Recommendation, full reinstatement, compensation for damages, and formal apology. Daniel nodded once. Approved. Another page turned. Disciplinary action against former management confirmed. There was no hesitation this time. Proceed, Daniel said, because justice was no longer a question. It was execution. Elsewhere in the building, the results moved quickly. Emails were sent, notices issued, positions restructured. And for the first time, the system did not protect itself. It corrected itself. Mr. Karanja received the final notice in silence. He read every word. Slowly, carefully, as if doing so might change something. But it didn't. Termination effective immediately. Pending legal review. He lowered the paper. For a moment, he simply stared at it. Because this time, there was no one to blame, no one to control, no one to silence. Only consequence. And consequence does not negotiate. Back at the hospital, Muthoni sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting lightly on her stomach. She had barely slept. Not from discomfort, but from anticipation, because something was coming. She could feel it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. The door opened. Daniel stepped in, and something in his expression told her everything before he even spoke. It's done, he said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Muthoni's breath caught. What? Does that mean she asked, her voice barely above a whisper? Daniel stepped closer. It means you didn't do anything wrong, he said. Her eyes filled instantly. Tears, not of pain, not of fear, but of release. And your job, she asked. Daniel held her gaze. It's yours, he said. Silence. Because the moment needed space, needed time, to be understood, to be felt. "I can go back," she whispered. Daniel shook his head slightly. "You don't have to go back," he said. "The distinction mattered. Because returning was not the same as being restored. You have a choice now," he added. Choice. The word felt unfamiliar on her tongue. Because for so long her life had not included it. Muthoni looked down at her hands, then at her stomach, then back at him. "I don't know what to choose," she admitted. Daniel nodded. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to decide today, because healing does not happen on demand." Later that afternoon, Muthoni was discharged. The hospital doors opened, and for the first time since everything had begun, she stepped outside without fear. The air felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. As if something heavy had been removed from it. Daniel stood beside her. "Where would you like to go?" he asked. Muthoni hesitated. "Then home," she said, because no matter how much had changed, home was still where everything began. The car ride was quiet. Not empty, but full. Of thoughts. Of possibilities. Of something new taking shape. When they arrived, Daniel stepped out first, opening the door for her. Muthoni looked at the small apartment building, the narrow hallway, the life she had left behind just days before. It looked the same, but she didn't feel the same, because she wasn't. Inside, Mama Achieng sat on the bed, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw her daughter. Muthoni moved forward, carefully embracing her gently. "I'm okay, Mama," she whispered. Her mother held her tightly. "I was worried," she said. "I know." There were no explanations, no long stories. Because some things didn't need to be said. They just needed to be felt. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly life began to rebuild. But not in the same way. Because this time it was built with awareness, with support, with choice. Caribou Corporate Services changed. Not overnight, but steadily. Policies were rewritten, wages corrected, voices heard. And for the first time, people felt seen. Muthoni didn't return as a cleaner. She chose something else. With Daniel's support, she joined the company in a new role, helping oversee worker welfare programs. Not because she was given charity, but because she understood something no report could capture. What it meant to survive inside a broken system, and how to fix it. Months later, under a clear Nairobi sky, Muthoni stood outside the hospital once more. But this time, she wasn't alone. In her arms, she held her child. Small, warm, alive. She looked down at the tiny face, her heart steady, in a way it had never been before. "Your name is Baraka," she whispered. A blessing. Not because life had been easy, but because it had been survived. Daniel stood a short distance away, watching quietly. Not intruding, not claiming, just present. Because some connections don't need labels. They simply exist. Muthoni looked up. Their eyes met. And in that moment, there was no debt, no imbalance, no rescue, just recognition. Two people who had chosen not to walk away. And somewhere in the city, life continued, as it always did. But for Muthoni, everything had changed. Not because someone saved her, but because someone saw her and chose to act. Because in a world that often looks away, the rarest thing is not power. It is attention. And the rarest kind of justice is the one that arrives when someone decides enough is enough. Sometimes the deepest injustices don't happen in loud, dramatic moments. They happen quietly, behind closed doors, inside systems that were never questioned, to people the world has learned not to see. Muthoni's story reminds us of something simple yet powerful. Kindness is never wasted. Even when it seems unnoticed, even when it costs you everything, it carries a truth that cannot stay hidden forever. And when that truth meets the right moment, it becomes justice. Not perfect justice, not instant justice, but real. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect, what would you have done in her place? And more importantly, what can you do today to make sure someone else is not ignored? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us humanity still matters.